You're a weary traveler, and this cozy historical corner welcomes you. Before we journey to the brutal medieval winters, I want to warmly greet you, dear listener. Whether nestled under covers, drifting to sleep, or simply seeking quiet historical tales, I'm glad you've joined me tonight. If you don't mind, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Feel free to comment. It's a delight to see our diverse history enthusiast community. If you enjoy calm, immersive past tales, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next installment. But for now, let's shed modern stresses and travel back to a time when winter's icy grip held far greater peril than most can imagine. A time when seasonal changes brought not just inconvenience, but true fear for survival.
Picture medieval European countryside. Leaves are gone, the sun low, its weak rays barely warming the biting air. Frosty fields crunch as a breeze carries the first snow flurries. Winter's coming, and for that era's people, it means one thing: hardship. The cold slowly seeps in, lingering for months. The landscape will soon be white, rivers and ponds frozen into gleaming ice. Before central heating and insulated homes, warmth was a distant dream for all but the wealthiest.
But it wasn't always this harsh. Medieval winters weren't always so brutal, so unforgiving. Seasons once followed a predictable rhythm. Snow was met with acceptance, not dread. Then something shifted. The climate itself changed, ushering in the Little Ice Age. From the 14th to the 19th century, it brought colder temperatures and harsher winters than anyone remembered. Its causes are still unclear, but its impact was widespread. Crops failed, livestock perished, and icy winds blew harder than ever. The Great Frost of 1709 is a famous example of its fury. Temperatures plummeted so low that rivers and lakes froze solid. London's River Thames became a frozen highway, with shops and even fires set directly on the ice, a surreal yet costly sight. Many died from the cold that year, huddled in homes as the world outside turned to ice. Yet, amidst the suffering, some found solace in the frigid weather. Young Isaac Newton, then a Cambridge student, was one. When the Great Frost hit, Newton returned to his family farm. There, by the fire, he had ample time to ponder universal mysteries. During this unexpected break, Newton began developing groundbreaking ideas, laying the groundwork for his theories on calculus and optics. Who knows what other great minds were sparked to brilliance by a long, cold winter's quiet isolation? It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit seeks light. For most medieval people, winter was endured, not enjoyed. The rich could afford thick woolens, ample firewood, and well-stocked larders for lean months. For peasants and serfs, the majority, it was vastly different. Imagine waking in a one-room cottage, air thick with smoke from a sputtering fire. Your breath mists as you rise from your straw mattress, careful not to disturb shivering family members huddled for warmth. Cold seeps through every crack, numbing fingers and toes until they ache. Breakfast, if you're lucky, might be meager porridge or stale bread. Food from the last harvest is dwindling, and you know long winter months will only bring more scarcity. Livestock suffers too, coats matted with frost, huddled in the barn, breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge into the snow to gather firewood, back-breaking work that leaves hands raw and chapped from the cold. But you know that without fire, your family won't survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in medieval times, a constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival consuming every waking hour. Yet, even facing such hardship, there were moments of resilience and even joy. The medieval world was deeply attuned to nature's rhythms. Seasonal changes were marked not just by weather shifts, but by rich rituals and celebrations. So, even in winter's depths, glimmers of light appeared. One such beacon was the midwinter feast of St. Stephen, held annually on December 26th. For a brief period, medieval society's rigid social hierarchies inverted. A peasant or serf was crowned the lord of misrule for the day. This lucky individual presided over a raucous celebration of food, drink, and revelry, a rare indulgence in an otherwise austere existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope in medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on community strength, family and friendship bonds held profound importance. Imagine a small village huddled against the snow. Smoke from chimneys mingles with the leaden sky, a sign of life amidst the barren landscape. Inside homes, families gather around the hearth, sharing stories and meager food scraps. There's a sense of unity, a shared purpose in the face of hardship. Neighbors trudge through snow to check on each other, bringing firewood or stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces are etched with weariness, but also quiet determination. They survived past winters, they'll survive this one too. The long, cold months march on, snow piling higher, ice thickening daily. Yet, even in winter's darkest depths, hope glimmers on the horizon. Medieval people knew that no matter how brutal the season, spring would return. They watched for the first signs with keen, practiced eyes, days lengthening slightly, earth softening beneath the snow. When the thaw finally began, it was celebrated with joy and reverence we can scarcely imagine today. Plough Monday marked winter's official end, the day fieldwork could resume. Ploughs, idle so long, were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies, symbolizing life's renewed cycle. As the first furrows cut into the earth, palpable relief and gratitude filled the air. Life had been hard, yes, bitterly hard at times, but they'd endured. Through winter's long darkness, through hunger, cold, and uncertainty, medieval Europeans held fast to spring's promise. Now, as the land thawed and green shoots pushed toward the sun, that promise was fulfilled. Such resilience is hard to grasp in our modern age of convenience and comfort. The idea of facing relentless hardship year after year is almost unimaginable. Yet it's deeply humbling to know our ancestors did just that. They faced their world's brutal reality with remarkable strength and fortitude. They found hope in the darkest times and joy in the simplest things, leaving us a legacy of resilience echoing through the ages. So, next time you shiver on a cold winter's day, take a moment to remember those who came before. Remember their struggles and triumphs, sorrow and joy. Above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through the harshest winters. Ultimately, that's perhaps the greatest lesson from the medieval world. No matter how dark the night or cold the wind, spring's promise always waits just around the corner. And with that, dear listener, our journey through medieval Europe's brutal winters concludes. I hope these tales of hardship and resilience have offered a new perspective on your own seasonal experiences. May you always find warmth and comfort in family and community bonds as our ancestors did long ago. And may spring's promise light your way through even the coldest nights. Thank you for joining me in this cozy historical corner. If you enjoyed our time, please subscribe and share these stories. So many more fascinating tales await exploration. For now, I bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As winter's brutal conditions tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged weren't immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge, staving off biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. Maintaining a royal residence during winter was staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed stockpiling to fuel roaring hearths, the sole heat source. Kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables to sustain the court through long, lean months when fresh food was scarce. Servants scrambled to seal every crack to keep out the insidious chill. Yet, even diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one chilling tale, a medieval queen tragically perished from exposure within her own palace. Chroniclers say Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of her supposed refuge. Such grim fates demonstrate death's ominous paw over the medieval world in winter's dark depths. Amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found ways to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, a faint glimmer came from the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration on December 26th. This day offered a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare, sanctioned opportunity for revelry and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this single day, a commoner was appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over merriment and issue playful edicts to his betters. However fleeting, this act of licensed satire provided a vital pressure valve for simmering tensions and resentments bred by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirth-filled day, where all could partake as equals in feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than mere diversion. It was a critical survival mechanism as winter's cruelty threatened to break both body and spirit. The bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during St. Stephen's feast and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the leanest times. A 1377 chronicle recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbors, whose meager winter stores were exhausted long before spring. On the verge of starvation, they pooled their last tattered resources to share a humble meal on St. Stephen's Day. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining ravages. Such acts of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter. A helping hand extended to a frostbitten traveler or an extra log given to a shivering widow could mean the difference between life and death. The grim shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. But even the warmest expressions of conviviality inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. St. Stephen's feast was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and cold crept past even the most assiduously stoked hearths, the faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. Yet, year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial lost battles against light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the battle-weary tillers of the earth, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January, it heralded the ground's imminent thawing and reawakening.
Though winter's deepest rigors had yet to fully release their stranglehold, Plough Monday's ritual preparations offered a tangible talisman of hope, an assurance of winter's inevitable loosening and spring's return. Picture a patchwork of furrowed fields slowly emerging from receding snows and frosts. Newly harnessed draft teams leaning into the first tentative overturning of the frigid clods. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, medieval man dealt another blow to winter's retreating sovereignty and proclaimed his dogged persistence in the face of nature's caprice. We in the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-stocked larders and resilient infrastructure, can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure a medieval winter's unremitting brutality. If the season's impositions seem daunting to us now from the cozy remove of our temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering be? Yet, when we grumble about minor inconveniences like a delayed flight or a rain-snarled commute, perhaps we should reflect on the unyielding misery experienced by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity they were forced to draw upon year after arduous year simply to survive. Their ability to eke out moments of celebration and fellowship amid such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only withstood winter's ravages, but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness is a testament to the indomitable spirit that slumbers within us all, waiting to be roused by hardship's clarion call. So the next time our modern discontents start to chafe, perhaps we do well to cast our minds back to our predecessors' icy plights. In remembrance of those who came before, let's embrace the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. And as we nestle gratefully into our warm beds, let's spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights defined the season. The fortunate retreated to the meager warmth of smoky hovels and drafty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of winter's greatest hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped, unsanitary living conditions, disease spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and blurry-eyed. But far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe, claiming over 10,000 lives in Paris alone. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. Winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It wasn't unusual for multiple family members to succumb, leaving behind orphan children and shattered lives. Even royalty wasn't spared. Disease often spread more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife Jane Seymour to postnatal complications likely exacerbated by the age's poor hygienic practices. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in cold months faced an especially precarious start. In 16th century London, fully half of all children didn't survive to their 5th birthday. One poignant practice speaks volumes.
The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to a seriously ill infant's hand. If the child died, this ribbon secured their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those with limited means, even basic comforts like shelter, food, and warmth couldn't be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing fallen timber gathering. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving for feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and spring's first shy greenery was months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables made for dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and, if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions. Tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was particularly harrowing, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh. Parents reportedly smothered starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered streets and fields, too numerous for proper burial. Though this famine was remarkable in severity, localized crop failures and shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down, knowing things would likely worsen before they improved. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment bore the unmistakable stamp of the season. The sheer drudgery of existing in the bitter cold colored all aspects of life. Socially, winter was a time of drawing in and relying on family and community bonds. Cheerful gatherings around the Yuletide log gave way to more sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, people looked inward for amusement and enrichment during long, dark evenings. Storytelling and singing helped while away the hours. The flickering light of rushlights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. Idle hands being the devil's playground, industriousness was more necessity than virtue. Winter's confinement at least provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to curl up with a good book, though this was a rather exclusive club. In late 15th century England, a humble tradesman's library might boast a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps some merry jests or Robin Hood tales. Only the wealthy could afford lavishly illuminated volumes prized by bibliophiles. Readers often read aloud for the whole household's benefit and entertainment. Winter was a time for sharing treasured stories of brave knights, cunning tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were perennial favorites, their intricate plots and noble themes transporting listeners far beyond their winter refuge's confines. Less wholesome entertainments also livened up tedious winter days. Gambling with dice was popular, often leading to heated tempers and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones and dice rattled in many a tavern and great hall as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common winter diversion. Fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine boosted body temperature and spirits. Public houses saw roaring trade, offering fellowship, entertainment, and escape from bitter cold. Inebriation often loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions, sparking lively debates, bawdy songs, and occasional brawls. Short, dark winter days also lent themselves to quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway in the medieval mind, and winter was a time for drawing closer to God. With agricultural work at a lull, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and good works. Traditional nativity plays and pageants of Christmastide gave way to more somber devotions. As winter deepened, the pious might undertake pilgrimages to holy sites, braving harsh conditions as a sign of commitment. Others spent hours in hushed churches, fingers numb with cold on rosary beads, meditating on their eternal soul. Charity was also an important winter value, with almsgiving seen as a Christian duty. The 7 acts of corporal mercy provided a blueprint for generosity: feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. In a season of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of human kindness made all the difference. Of course, winter's harshness sometimes brought out the worst in human nature. Crime tended to rise as desperation set in and theft opportunities increased. With people spending more time indoors in close quarters, tempers often frayed, leading to a spike in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to handle this seasonal surge in lawlessness. Trials were often delayed until weather improved, leaving the accused to languish in dank, overcrowded jails. Punishments could be harsh, with fines, floggings, and even executions meted out to the guilty. But even in the face of winter's bleak realities, the indomitable human spirit endured. People found small joys and moments of levity. The distant promise of spring sustained them through the darkest, coldest nights. February's lengthening days brought a welcome reprieve with the feast of St. Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility rite, Christianized into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by medieval people. It was a bright spot of warmth and tenderness in winter's very heart. The custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was well established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and lads gathered to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the next year. These annual pairings often led to merry flirtations and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. The simple act of receiving a handmade card from an admirer could set hearts aflutter. Even in the chilliest weather, winter, for all its woes, couldn't freeze love's fires. As St. Valentine's feast passed into Lent, the season's austerities intensified, but there was a sense that the worst was now behind them, and brighter days lay ahead. Snowdrops and crocuses, poking their fragile heads through the frost, offered tangible evidence that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season left a firmer mark than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship when mere survival was an achievement. Yet, it was also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest elements. Medieval winter tested the human spirit, proving ground for the values of faith, family, and community. Winking icicles, frosty meadows, and fallow fields may have been a postcard-perfect scene, but the realities were anything but picturesque. However, this crucible of snow, ice, and want also forged a people of remarkable grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who weathered the very worst winter offered and still found reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So, next time you bemoan a delayed train or a slushy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors.
Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource. And they emerged victorious, spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I'll leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed, thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it's done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than foe.
Frost crackled underfoot as you trudged through snowdrifts, breath clouding in the icy air. Icicles glittered in the pale sunlight from the eaves of wattle and daub huts. The village lay hushed and still, huddled against winter's onslaught. This was winter for most of our medieval ancestors, not the cozy scenes we imagine of merry feasts in snug castles decked with holly, buzzing with music and laughter. No, for the vast majority, winter meant bone-chilling cold, gnawing hunger, and grim survival.
The specter of winter hunger was ever present. With withered crops and scarce livestock, putting food on the table became a daily battle. Grain stores dwindled, and bitter herbs and shriveled turnips were soon all that stood between a family and starvation. One bitterly cold winter in 1315, an English farmer's harvest fell short by a third due to storms and freezing weather. Desperate serfs resorted to eating straw roofs off their huts and boiling shoe leather, all while still forced to labor for their lofty lords. Malnutrition weakened the body's defenses against winter maladies. The common cold could quickly morph into life-threatening pneumonia or bronchitis. Influenza cut through villages like a scythe, felling young and old alike as they shivered in shabby shelters. With teeth chattering, medieval folk huddled together against the chill, packing into the relative warmth of shuttered houses. Yet this close-quartered coziness came at a cost. The stale, smoky air, ripe with the odor of unwashed bodies, festering chamber pots, and dirty rushes, was a breeding ground for disease. In one 14th-century Suffolk household, 13 family members, from grandparents to babes in arms, along with their scrawny chickens and mangy dogs, huddled in a single, tiny smokehouse all winter. It's incredible that any emerged alive come spring. Sickness wasn't the only danger lurking in the long, dark nights. Fires were a constant threat in packed wooden cities and towns. One misdirected spark could swiftly grow into a furious blaze, hungrily devouring tightly clustered buildings and snuffing out lives. The Great Fire of London in 1212 started on a cold November night, quickly raging through the city's cramped lanes while water froze in the pipes. An estimated 3,000 Londoners perished in the flames, and many more were left homeless in winter's icy grip. Travel was especially treacherous in these frigid months. Roads dissolved into muddy quagmires, while blizzards obscured the way with blinding flurries. With daylight scarce, travelers risked becoming disoriented and losing their way, stumbling from the path to a frozen grave. In 1311, English Queen Isabella set out from Canterbury for London as winter twilight deepened. Her party lost the road and wandered helplessly until the early hours, while the pregnant queen wept copiously in fear and exhaustion. Winter's onslaught was no less punishing for working animals. Horses and oxen grew gaunt and weak on scant winter feed. Their labored breaths smoked in the chill air as they hauled logs and packs through knee-deep snow. Frostbite blackened extremities, and ice cracked hooves and wheel spokes alike. Yet, even in the bleak depths of winter, medieval people found slivers of light. The Feast of St. Stephen, or Boxing Day as we know it, was a time of charity and goodwill. Alms boxes in churches overflowed with offerings for the poor, while lords supplied hearty meals to cold and hungry tenants. The Lord of Misrule tradition brought a spark of subversive festivity to the darkest days. A lowly peasant jester or deacon would be crowned king and preside over merry revels marked by drunkenness, role reversals, and mischief, a temporary upending of the established order. Despite the privations and dangers medieval winters posed, hope somehow endured, etched in frosty breaths, and no doubt uttered as fervent prayers. Hope that the weak and ailing would survive, that food would last until spring, that light and warmth would conquer the constricting cold once more. So this winter, when you grumble about shoveling the driveway, curse at the thermostat, or get chilled waiting for the bus, spare a thought for those who came before us. Our medieval ancestors faced the Herculean task of surviving winter after winter with few of the comforts we take for granted. Their quiet courage in the face of winter's cruelty is perhaps the greatest lesson they have to teach us. Though we'll never know most of their names or stories, we can appreciate the magnitude of their struggles and find inspiration in their endurance that saw them through to brighter days.
The bitter frost continued its icy reign, transforming the landscape into a crystalline wonderland that would be picturesque if not for the immense hardship it inflicted on the land's inhabitants. Snow fell ceaselessly from the ash-gray sky, blanketing the countryside in a suffocating white shroud. Icicles hung like glittering daggers from the eaves of peasant hovels and grand manors alike.
Hearth fires, burning day and night, offered only fleeting respite from the penetrating chill. Smoke from the precious flames stung watering eyes and choked lungs in the close, fetid air of wattle and daub huts. There, huddled bodies crammed together for warmth, humans and livestock alike, the pungent aromas of dung and unwashed flesh mingling into a uniquely medieval winter perfume. For some, however, even this dubious comfort was a luxury they could ill afford. Scant food stores stretched precariously thin, and bellies rumbled with persistent hunger. Many of the poorest subsisted on little more than coarse bread and thin gruel, praying they would survive to see spring. The specter of famine lingered in every home, from lowly serf to high lord. None escaped winter's deadly grasp, not even those who wore crowns. In drafty stone castles that seemed to inhale the cold and exhale an unrelenting damp, rulers shivered beneath mountains of furs. Royal households required vast amounts of firewood and provisions to ride out the long winter months. Woe to the kingdom whose sovereign failed to plan ahead. According to one account, a medieval Bohemian princess perished from the cold in her bedchamber, her demise a chilling reminder that wealth and status offered only partial protection from the elements. But for a peasant family, the loss of a loved one to winter's icy scythe was all too common, an occurrence as cruel as it was predictable. Disease added to the season's prodigious death toll. Agues and fevers spread like wildfire through communities weakened by malnutrition and close quarters. The stale, smoky air of hovels and the ubiquitous filth made lungs more vulnerable to infection. Medieval physicians, their useless treatments often rooted more in superstition than science, could do little. Roads, treacherous with snowdrifts and black ice, compounded winter's woes. Only the desperate or foolhardy ventured far from their home's meager comfort in the darkest months. Travel for any distance was an ordeal undertaken at one's peril. Peddlers' carts remained idle, depriving isolated villages of needed goods. Tithes and taxes went uncollected, to the vexation of liege lords and clergy. And woe to the army that had to mount a campaign over snow-choked roads, their supply lines stretched and fraying in the frigid weather. The winter of 1407 saw one of the Middle Ages' most astonishing military feats, born of this brutal necessity for wintry warfare. The redoubtable Welsh rebel leader Owen Glyndwr faced off against the superior forces of future King Henry V in the high mountain passes. Glyndwr's men, accustomed to harsh conditions, drew the English into a trap amidst the blinding blizzard. Hapless in their heavy armor, the English ranks broke and fled, many perishing from exposure. Glyndor's stunning victory, won as much by the winter as by Welsh martial prowess, lives on in legend. The winters of medieval Europe were often marked by devastating famines that claimed countless lives. When cold lingered and spring planting was delayed, food shortages quickly followed. The infamous Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was sparked by an unusually wet and chilly spring that rotted seedlings in the ground. Successive crop failures over the next 2 years plunged much of the continent into starvation. In England, bread prices skyrocketed to 20 times the normal cost. The poor resorted to eating grass, roots, even tree bark. Desperate scavengers dug up graves to cannibalize the dead. An estimated 10 to 25% of cities like Ypres and Bruges in modern-day Belgium perished. In the French town of Troyes, a citizen wrote in his diary that the poor were eating dogs, horses, and other unclean things. The misery was compounded by crime and disease as malnourished citizens turned to theft and violence. One heartbreaking account from the St. Mary's Abbey Chronicles relates the fate of a starving woman imprisoned for stealing a loaf of bread. The woman was pregnant and starving, but the baker would give her no bread, so she stole a loaf and was caught. The judges would not pardon her, so she was hanged. As she died, the infant fell from her womb before the eyes of the people. The child lay bloody and screaming on the ground, but no one wanted to touch or rescue it, and the baby soon died where it fell. The famine finally eased in 1318 when weather turned favorable and crops grew. But the specter of starvation stalked the land every winter, ready to reap a grim harvest at the slightest adversity. For medieval people, winter was always a time of gnawing unease, if not outright terror, as they prayed their meager food stores would last until spring. Malnutrition weakened the populace, leaving them vulnerable to disease. Winter's close, unsanitary living conditions led to frequent outbreaks of infections like influenza, dysentery, and pneumonia. Respiratory illnesses took a heavy toll, spread by coughing and stale, smoky air as people huddled around fires. Something as simple as a winter cold could quickly turn deadly. Even doctors of the era were of little help, relying on dubious treatments like bleeding and purging with laxatives to restore a patient's humors. Emperor Charlemagne allegedly died of pleurisy in the bitter winter of 814 after his doctor's ineffective treatments. Many historians believe the Black Death of the 14th century spread so quickly because malnourished citizens packed in winter quarters had little resistance. The 1348-1349 outbreak killed a staggering 30 to 60% of Europe's population. One poignant tale from Pistoia, Italy, describes the devastation. "I am sick at heart and can barely bring myself to write, for things here go from bad to worse. Many are dead and many more are dying. Shops are closed, taverns deserted. One passes down streets without meeting a soul. Wails of grief echo from houses where death has struck. The stench of rot rises from mass graves. I fear our city may soon be empty of life entirely. I beg you, stay where you are and pray for us unceasingly." As the plague raged, entire villages were wiped out. Suffering was compounded by hasty mass burials in frigid ground and sick people expelled to die alone in the snow for fear of contagion. The Black Death's devastating losses left deep psychological scars and forever altered the medieval world. Winter was an especially dreaded time for the elderly, young children, and expected mothers. Without modern medicine, these vulnerable populations frequently succumbed to cold, disease, or malnourishment. It's estimated that in some medieval societies, up to 20–30% of infants died within their first year, many during harsh winter months. Pregnancy and childbirth complications, exacerbated by poor diet and chilly conditions, claimed countless mothers and babies. The perils of winter childbirth are illustrated by the sad tale of Matilda, the 12-year-old daughter of King Henry I of England. In the winter of 1120, Matilda was aboard the White Ship, sailing from France to England. The ship hit a rock and quickly sank, sending Matilda and hundreds into the frigid English Channel. Matilda nearly escaped in a small rescue boat, but cried out for her half-brother William, still in the water. When the boat returned for him, so many desperate people climbed in that it capsized, casting Matilda back into the cold waves. The king's young daughter, pregnant with her first child, perished. Her grief-stricken father reportedly fainted and never smiled again. The very old and very young were always in peril during bleak medieval winters. If they survived disease and starvation, they might still freeze to death in their sleep. The medieval poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight chillingly describes elderly King Arthur shivering in a drafty castle hall, his teeth chattering as he spoke. Without today's insulating ice caps and glaciers, medieval winters brought raging snowstorms and devastating floods. In 1216, King John of England supposedly lost the crown jewels while crossing a marshy area in East Anglia called the Wash. Fleeing enemies, John's baggage train was swallowed by a surging high tide, whipped up by fierce gales. The king allegedly escaped by the skin of his teeth, but his treasure, including priceless jeweled crowns and scepters, disappeared. John died of dysentery days later, a broken man. Some historians believe the loss was the final blow. Winter storms often meant disaster for coastal communities, battered by hurricane-force winds and massive waves. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a terrible flood that struck England in 1099. On St. Martin's Day, the 11th of November, came a great sea flood through the length of this land and overran it so far as no man remembered that it ever did before, and drowned many towns and a countless number of people. Another North Sea flood on January 16, 1219, completely submerged the low-lying Netherlands, killing over 50,000. In an era with no early warning systems or emergency shelters, the population was completely at the mercy of the elements. All medieval folk could do was pray as icy floodwaters rose and wind howled like hellhounds outside their frail homes.
Harsh winters also meant an increase in fires as people tried to keep warm. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle again gives a chilling account of a deadly London blaze in 1132. A dreadful fire broke out on London Bridge and spread so rapidly that before it could be extinguished, it burned down a great part of the city with the principal church of St. Paul and the Cathedral of Canterbury besides many other churches and houses. The force of the wind and the violence of the flames carried burning rafters and sheets of lead from the roofs an extraordinary distance. With most buildings timber and tightly crammed, medieval cities were tinderboxes. A stray spark or overturned candle could ignite an unstoppable inferno, especially when gale-force winter winds whipped flames into a frenzy. People fled through narrow, twisting streets as their homes burned, often with little more than the clothes on their backs. Countless tragic stories exist of families separated, children trampled, and people trapped and burned alive. Given limited firefighting technology, citizens often only threw buckets of water or snow on flames, praying the wind would shift. Devastation could be near total, leaving thousands homeless and destitute in winter. But perhaps medieval winter's greatest danger required no blizzards, floods, or conflagrations. Sometimes the simple, inescapable, life-sucking cold was enough. It's hard for us to imagine in our modern world of central heating and thermal fabrics, but winter's bone-chilling damp and constant dark were adversaries from which there was little defense. With only smoky fires and furs, winter cold sank deep into medieval people's bones. Arthritis and rheumatism were common, pain worsening annually. Extremities went numb, then black with frostbite. Pneumonia and influenza ran rampant in close quarters. The cold seemed to seep into the very soul, sapping all energy and vitality.
The 6th century British monk Gildas paints a grim picture in On the Ruin of Britain. The nights are long and dark, the days dreary and chill. The air bites with malice, the icy blasts cut to the bone. All is blanketed in snow and frost. It is a time of great suffering for man and beast alike, when all the earth seems dead and frozen, locked in the clutches of a frigid hell. For the elderly and frail, winter was especially dreaded, marked by a hopeless feeling that warmth might never return. People piled on every piece of clothing and huddled for warmth, yet the cold crept in. Fires sputtered and died in the damp, leaving only plumes of acrid smoke that stung eyes and choked throats. Coughs and sniffles echoed in the darkness, interspersed with groans of the sick and dying. The cold kept its icy grip round the clock, turning exhalations to frost and numbing appendages. It seemed to reach icy fingers into the chest, squeezing breath and congealing blood. Even the young and healthy moved as if through deep water, sluggish and yielding. There was no escaping winter's clutches in the Middle Ages. No Florida vacations or cozy electric blankets to take the edge off. The cold was a constant, merciless companion, sapping precious energy needed for survival. It's no wonder the medieval world measured time not in months or years, but in how many winters one survived. Making it through to another spring was a triumph, one that grew more difficult each passing season. But somehow, despite brutal conditions, rampant disease, gnawing hunger, and life-stealing cold, medieval people endured. Year after merciless winter, they shouldered on, armored only in their indomitable spirits. When meager food stores ran low, they tightened belts. When fire burned to embers, they drew another tattered blanket close. And when darkness pressed from all sides, they huddled and whispered stories of brighter days. A moving passage in the 14th century English poem Piers Plowman captures the sheer resilience of the medieval spirit. Through woe and winter's bale, frost and snow and sleet and hail, all shall pass and peace prevail. Hope shall triumph and never fail. Even in winter's darkest depths, medieval folk found small joys and moments of grace. Neighbors shared what little they had. Amidst cold and dark, people sang and prayed. At night, some swore they heard angels in howling winds, promising warmth and light. So, medieval people held fast to hope, clung fiercely to life, and kept eyes fixed on the far horizon where spring waited. They knew in their bones that winter, however brutal, was always temporary. The sun would return, snows would melt, and the world would be reborn, green and glorious, as if winter had never come. All they had to do was endure. And endure they did, with a strength forged in the very ice and stone of the season. The winters of the Middle Ages were brutal, merciless, and seemingly endless. They brought hunger, disease, destruction, and death. But they also brought out the best in the human spirit. The unshakable will to survive, to hold fast to hope, to come together in compassion and kindness. The medieval world was tempered in winter's icy crucible and emerged stronger for it, a little tougher, a little wiser, with a bone-deep appreciation for the turning of the seasons. Perhaps we can learn a lesson from our medieval forebears as we grumble about scraping frost from windshields. For them, winter was a matter of life and death, a season to be survived with gritted teeth and unshakable resolve. And survive they did, passing down tales of winter's wrath and the invincible power of the human spirit. In our modern winters, may we remember their fortitude and find inspiration to shoulder through our own dark days. Medieval people stared winter full in its icy face and refused to yield. They endured floods and famine, blizzards and blackest night. They buried their dead in frozen ground and woke to the groans of the starving. But always, always they held fast to spring's promise.
And if they could make it through winter after winter with little more than faith and furs, then surely we can find the strength to face our own battles, knowing that the thaw will come and light will return. The brutal winters of the medieval world may be long past, but their lessons echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. So let's walk in our ancestors' footsteps and meet winter's chill with courage, compassion, and unshakable hope. If they braved the darkest season with heads unbowed, so too can we. Winter is coming, but spring, as the medieval world knew so well, is never far behind. As chilling winds howled across the frozen landscape, medieval folks gathered around flickering hearth fires. Huddled for precious warmth, they shared tales of past winters, harsh, unforgiving seasons that tested even the hardiest souls. In humble cottages and grand manor houses alike, winter's icy breath knew no bounds. Drafty shutters and thin thatched roofs offered scant protection against the relentless cold. From peasants to princes, all felt Jack Frost's bite, nipping at noses and numbing extremities. But some were lucky enough to have a roaring hearth. The crackle of flames and smoke's aroma offered small comfort against winter's onslaught. In high-born castles, great hall fireplaces consumed vast quantities of wood, tended by shivering servants whose labors never ceased. Yet even the mightiest nobles shuddered to venture beyond the fire's glow, for winter's chill penetrated even the thickest stone walls and richest furs. For those of low birth, the season brought an especially grim, arduous struggle. Their rough-hewn hovels boasted precious little in creature comforts. Meager rations of peat or scavenged wood barely fed sputtering hearths. Families crammed into squalid quarters, sharing body heat and breathing air thick with smoke and unwashed humanity's fetid stench. It was a bleak existence. Yet, even facing such privations, there were moments of cheer. The glow of communal fires in the village square drew folks from their hovels for short respites. Gathered around leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests, stories, and songs. For a fleeting time, winter's cruel realities seemed distant. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their ardor undimmed by cold. Children shrieked with delight, scampering and sliding across frozen ponds. Even the elderly felt their years lift for a spell, transported to carefree winters of youth. Such interludes of merriment were all the more precious for their rarity. Winter's onslaught was relentless. Thoughts soon turned to empty bellies and the gnawing hunger that was the constant companion of the poor. Dreams of spring's bounty seemed a cruel mockery as fields lay barren beneath a blanket of snow. The specter of famine loomed large. A failed harvest could doom entire villages. Many a mother watched in anguish as her child's cheeks grew gaunt, eyes dulled with starvation. The cruel calculus of scarcity bred a special desperation. Tales abounded of depraved lengths to which some would go to fill their bellies, unnatural acts haunting pious folks' nightmares. Hunger wasn't the only scourge. Winter's chill breath bred a host of maladies preying on the weakened populace. Pneumonia's hacking cough echoed through many a hovel as loved ones watched helplessly. Pox and flux raged unchecked, decimating families. The very old and young were especially vulnerable, their frail bodies ill-equipped for winter's ravages. Perhaps the greatest cruelty was reserved for those forced to venture into winter's fury. Travelers risked life and limb on treacherous, ice-slicked roads. Many a hapless wayfarer met their doom, swallowed by swirling blizzards or plummeting into deep snowdrifts. Their frozen corpses wouldn't be discovered until the spring thaw, a grim reminder of winter's lethal power. Even valiant knights, stout warriors, weren't immune.
Clad in heavy armor, they were easy prey for bone-chilling cold that crept into every joint and rivet. Numb hands, clumsy with frozen gauntlets, fumbled with sword and shield. Once mighty charges floundered in deep snowdrifts as icicles formed on heaving flanks. Great and small alike cursed winter's name. In power halls, the crown weighed heavy on royal brows furrowed with care. Even a monarch couldn't reverse season's inexorable turn. The cost of supplying the court with provisions and firewood was staggering. Royal treasuries groaned under strain as grasping merchants reaped handsome profits. But for all its miseries, winter's reign wasn't eternal. Even in icy despair, folk clung to spring's sweet renewal. The joyous feast of St. Stephen offered welcome reprieve. For one raucous day, the world turned upside down as a lowly peasant became the lord of misrule. Drunken revelry and bawdy songs lifted spirits and lightened hearts. Laughter, that balm for the careworn soul, echoed through the frostbitten land. In time, winter's jellied grip loosened. Icicles dripped from eaves as the strengthening sun worked its subtle magic. Snowdrops and crocuses pushed through softening earth, delicate harbingers of winter's retreat. The land stirred with new life, shaking off frozen months' torpid slumber. Hearts lifted, voices raised in joyful celebration. The feast of the plow marked spring's triumphant return. Sleek oxen dragged gleaming plowshares through rich, dark earth as the cycle of planting and renewal began anew. Lean winter times soon faded as fields rippled with the land's green and golden bounty. Looking back, we marvel at our medieval forebears' fortitude. Year after pitiless year, they endured winter's cruelties with stoicism born of necessity. Their strength of spirit and unbreakable community bonds were their survival secret. In unimaginable hardship, they found pockets of hope and shared humanity. So, next time we grumble about a delayed flight or slushy streets, let's pause and reflect. Our modern winter woes are but a shadow of what once was. In history's tapestry, medieval icy trials loom large. They remind us of our species' remarkable resilience and a warm hearth's, a full belly's preciousness. As we drift to slumber, let's spare a thought for those who came before. In our dreams, perhaps we'll glimpse their world, harsher, crueler, yet one where the indomitable human spirit shone brighter for the darkness. Good night, and sweet dreams of gentle spring breezes to come. As long winter months dragged on, medieval folk eagerly sought opportunities to lift their spirits and foster community amidst hardships. One such beacon of hope was the Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated each year on December 26th. Though its origins are somewhat obscure, by the Middle Ages it was a cherished tradition across much of Europe. After Christmas Day's solemn religious observances, St. Stephen's Day was for merrymaking, feasting, and the playful reversal of normal social roles. Central to the festivities was the custom of misrule, where a peasant or commoner was appointed lord of misrule for the day, granted power to command social superiors. This light-hearted upending of the status quo provided a much-needed release valve for rigid class tensions that normally dominated medieval life. The Lord of Misrule presided over a topsy-turvy day of revelry, leading raucous processions, initiating mischievous pranks, and decreeing that everyone from lords to laborers should make merry. Professional entertainers, minstrels, jugglers, jesters plied their trades, while games of chance and skill amused crowds. Bawdy comedic sketches, called mummers' plays, reenacted tales from legend and folklore in exaggerated strokes. Mock jousts and farcical court proceedings induced peals of laughter, a welcome respite from grim winter realities. No medieval celebration was complete without a hearty feast. On St. Stephen's Day, the Lord of Misrule could insist the wealthy provide food and drink for the whole community.
a charitable gesture fostering goodwill and fellowship. Roasted meats, from geese and capons to the traditional roast boar's head marched in with fanfare, were the centerpiece. Minced meat pies, heavy with dried fruit and spices, offered sweet treats while the wassail bowl flowed freely, warm spiced cider bolstering spirits. You can almost hear laughter and lively chatter ringing through the halls, rising above blustery winter winds. For one brief, shining day, winter's hardships faded as the community united in joy and camaraderie. As the feast concluded and revelers dispersed, they carried the festivities' warmth like a flicker of firelight in the dark. Knowing they had friends and neighbors to rely on, finding moments of laughter and levity even in bleakest times surely buoyed their spirits for hard days ahead. And somehow, winter's icy grip seemed a bit less harsh, howling winds a bit more bearable, with a full belly and a heart full of fellowship. The Feast of St. Stephen was a timely reminder that even winter's deepest darkness would eventually yield to spring's first hopeful stirrings. Fragile shoots of new life tentatively emerged as snow receded and frozen ground thawed. Watchful eyes eagerly scanned for snowdrops, valiant little flowers poking fresh green stalks and delicate white blooms through melting slush. Their arrival heralded winter's end and rebirth's approach. In villages everywhere, weary folk rejoiced to see first hints of color and vitality return to a landscape shrouded in icy white stillness for months. With newfound spring in their steps, medieval peasants returned to agricultural rhythms, the great wheel of life turning once more. Hibernating livestock were led to regreening pastures, while farmers hitched teams to plows, eager to churn softening earth. The first Monday after Epiphany, in January, became Plow Monday for this reason. It marked when land could be worked again after the freeze, inaugurating a new farming season's labors. Plows, stored for winter, were hauled out and blessed in joyful Plow Monday processions through fields, while plowmen collected food, ale, and coins, anticipating work and harvest. Picture a weather-beaten village huddled around their communal plot, faces gratefully turned toward a brightening sky. With hoes and digging sticks, they prepared to sink the first hopeful seeds into receptive soil, an act of faith that spring would conquer winter. Among them, a wizened old grandmother, a child clutching each gnarled hand, showed them how to plant peas, just as her grandmother taught her. The smaller child giggled as an earthworm wriggled free, while the older solemnly pushed each seed into its waiting hollow. Moments like this, where knowledge passed from old to young and growth bloomed anew, made winter's privations worthwhile. The warm smile crinkling the grandmother's eyes held the promise that dark days had passed and life was returning. As seeds nestled into beds and the strengthening sun coaxed green shoots, winter's icy hold finally released, sliding away. The pall of cold and death, eased by hope and renewal, carried on spring's gentle breezes. Looking back, it's sobering to reflect on the immense fortitude and resilience needed to endure brutal medieval winters. With none of our amenities, their very survival was a marvel. Yet, amidst unimaginable hardship, medieval people found hope, joy, and celebration. Community warmth, spring's promise, laughter's restorative power, these lights guided them through winter's darkest depths. Perhaps, as we snuggle deeper under cozy comforters, insulated from cold, we can spare a thought for our ancestors. Next time winter wind rattles windows and we grumble at the chill, we might pause and smile wryly, recognizing our winter woes likely pale. As we drift to sleep, we can carry the knowledge that we too possess an ember of that invincible summer burning in medieval hearts. Assurance that spring always returns and life goes on no matter how dark the winter night. So as light fades and wind whispers a lullaby, let your imagination wander back, walking alongside those distant ancestors as they triumphed over winter's icy reign. May their courage and indomitable spirit inspire your dreams. If this journey piqued your curiosity, please like and subscribe. More tales await to lull you into slumber. Until next time, friends, sleep well and dream of cozy hearths and fresh green shoots stirring beneath the snow. Good night.